Good evening, everyone. Is this okay? Because I think last night, if you sat in the back, it might have been a little light. This seems better to me, anyhow. Probably because I got my hearing aids. It comes through there. This is your final test tonight to see how well you listened last night. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody get a sheet of the Beatitudes? Okay. And I believe Josh is going to start us off with some prayer. Do we need music sheets? Yep. Got them. Here's some more. Anybody need a music sheet? Everybody's got them. Okay.
All right, so tonight we'll begin with the song on that sheet, Light is Kindled in the Darkness.
Kindled in the darkness, when our hope seems most absurd, beacons through a shrouded future, pledges of Christ's steadfast word, gifts of goodness yet enfold us all around, beneath, above, signs of beauty still persisting, symbols of God's constant love. Though the wrong appears victorious, violence, prejudice, and pride, hope still rises from the wreckage. Joy and grief stand side by side. We will feel both pain and promise, terror, sting, and love's new birth, as we walk in light and shadow on God's blessed and leading earth. Raise your candle in the darkness, though the wick of faith burns low. Feed the fire with grace and justice, and in wonder watch it grow. As we gather flames together, till they shine with warmth and light, God dispels the night of hatred, and the blaze of love burns bright.
You're so blessed to have Josh, aren't you? Wonderful musician. And he always gets the right song, it seems. It picks it out of the air. And tonight, of course, I announced it last night, we're going to be talking about glimpses of resurrection. Resurrection is all around us, but sometimes we don't see it. It appears very subtly. And so in the midst of darkness, we need hope and we need strength. And so we're moving toward Easter. We're almost halfway there this week. And so from this journey, this movement from darkness, and even nature is cooperating with that, the days are getting longer and longer. We started a little bit darker at the beginning of March, and now, even with the time change, it's almost 8 o'clock. Isn't that very hopeful, you know? So before we started tonight's presentation, I was reflecting today, and I gave you a couple movie titles last night, and I figured I'd type out a few more. They're on the back of the Beatitudes there. And I don't know if you watch movies or not, but I think we have to continue to feed our souls with good spiritual reading, with good movies, that most of these here are true, and see how people witness to justice, witness to love, in the midst of suffering, injustice, oppression. And so just mercy, we talked about that last night. Invictus, we talked about that. Romero, today is the anniversary of Archbishop Oscar Romero. 1980, can you believe that? 45 years ago, he was assassinated. Do you know his story? He was the Archbishop of El Salvador, back in the late 70s, and he was a very traditional conservative bishop and Catholic. And in those days, the church affiliated with the wealthy, with the well-to-do, and yet there was so much suffering. It was a time of civil war. And so some of the Jesuit priests were very upset with him that he sided with the wealthy and not with the poor. And it wasn't until some of the Capuchinos, who were very church people, and a Jesuit who was very good friends of him and an altar boy were going to some service, and they were killed. His name was Rotulio, I think was his name, the Jesuit who was assassinated. When the bishop saw that, Bishop Romero, he was outraged, and he canceled all the masses in the entire diocese for that upcoming Sunday. He said, we're going to have the funeral mass of this priest and these two older men and these two altar servers who were also killed. So there was a little opposition to him canceling all the masses, but he wanted to make a point. We are one church, we are one community, we stand for justice, we stand for nonviolence. We're going to be talking a little bit about nonviolence tonight, because Jesus and God are the gods, God of nonviolence, and Jesus is the Savior of nonviolence. So that's a great film to watch. A lot of these films, I don't know if they're on live stream anymore or Netflix, but most times you can get them at the library. Cabrini, how many have seen that? That was in the theater just about a year ago. Not even a year ago, right? No, just a few weeks ago, I think. Yeah. That's about Mother Frances Cabrini. She came here in the late 1800s during a big Italian immigration over here. And she stood up to the church, and she stood up to politicians who didn't want her to do anything. And they said, you know, first of all, you're a woman. We talked about that yesterday. Okay. Women never seem to win. And they said, you know, for a woman, you make a great man. She said, no, men can't do what we do. But she's very feisty, she's very strong, she was very sickly, but she ended up establishing 67 hospitals and orphanages for the poor. And this was in the 1800s. No cell phones, no internet, no airplanes. She always had to go by sea, and she had a water phobia, if you can imagine. But that's an outstanding movie. And she's been canonized. Her feast day is, I think it's July 8th. Bonhoeffer, that was in the theaters about a year ago. Anybody see that? That's really well done, too. That's about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was convicted of trying to assassinate Hitler. But he was a conscientious objector against standing up for nonviolence. Den-Med Walking, we talked about that. A Hidden Life. Are you familiar with Franz Jagerstatter? There should be an extra T in there. Stoddard, sounds like stutter, but it's Stoddard. Familiar with him? He's up for canonization too. He lived during the time of Nazism, and he was from Austria, people were for him because they said, well, no, Hitler's a good man because he helped improve our economy. But this is before he got very violent, trying to take over all of the world. But Franz was married, lovely woman, and he was married to with 3 children, and he got conscripted to go into the Hitler Youth Corps. He went there, as all the youth had to, but when he was conscripted as an adult, he refused to go. He said, I'm against war, any kind of war. But both Bonhoeffer and Franz were executed. Gandhi, you're certainly familiar with him. I just rewatched that film not too long ago because he was a man of nonviolence also, and through his efforts overthrew the whole British Empire through nonviolence. You know, it seems we live in a culture of violence, don't we? And it seems like our response to violence is more violence, but violence never works, does it? It's a spiral, spirals down lower and lower and lower, and our weapons get more and more profuse and more deadly. And people say, well, nonviolence will never work. Has it ever been tried? So Gandhi shows that it was through nonviolence. Martin Luther King Jr. showed. He was a very religious man, a pastor, and before every march they had, which were always nonviolent, they would always pray. So that's both in the movie Selma and Rustin. Rustin was his right-hand man. But they advocated for civil rights. And because largely of his efforts through nonviolence, the African Americans were given civil rights. RFK, that's very good about, who was originally the Attorney General, was also killed. But it just shows his outreach to all of the people of America. The most dangerous man in America, that's Daniel Ellsberg. He was a conscientious objector. Eventually, he exposed the lies of the Vietnam War and published the Pentagon Papers. The Chosen, we talked about that last night. New Amsterdam, has anybody seen that? Yeah, isn't that wonderful? That was a great, there were many, I think, 83 episodes. I wanted to binge on it, but it's so good. But it was so hopeful, it was so positive. It's about, based on a true story of Bellevue Hospital, which in the movie they call it New Amsterdam. I think that's on Netflix or YouTube. But he tried to change the system, the hospital system, where it wasn't about making money or the doctors, but about the patient. Those of you who are in healthcare can identify with that. So 3 episodes, or 3 patients per night, just 45 minutes, and they all have a conclusion. And just the way they're treated with such dignity and respect is wonderful. A couple others I didn't put on there was Welcome to the Neighborhood, Fred Rogers. Have you seen that one? Won't You Be My Neighbor, whatever the title of that is. And then Of Gods and Men, that was out a number of years ago. That's about the Benedictine Cistercian monks in Algeria who were kidnapped but refused to leave. They were ministering to the Muslim people, and they refused to leave the Muslim people and were eventually kidnapped, and most of them were assassinated. So those are very good films I'd recommend just for your own enjoyment, but also education of who these church people are, who put their life on the line in many cases, but give a witness to who we are as people of the gospel. Yes. Of gods and men. Of gods and men. Okay. So on Ash Wednesday, when we came together as a community, and the churches have a lot of people on Ash Wednesday, don't they? It's just wonderful. For whatever reason they come. But they can all feel welcome. They can all receive ashes. They might not feel worthy to receive Eucharist, but it's a Eucharistic community. And the second reading is always, you have been appointed ambassadors of reconciliation for Christ. So all of us are ambassadors for Christ. That's a pretty prestigious title, wouldn't you say? When we have our own ambassadors for the United States, they're carefully chosen, hopefully, because they represent us and what our value system is. So we are called to represent Christ, to be ambassadors of reconciliation. And then as we've begun this Jubilee year, remember the Pope knocked on the door, December 8th was it, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and said we are now pilgrims of hope. So we have lots of titles. We're promoters of the gospel of nonviolence. We are ambassadors for reconciliation, and we are also people of hope. That's who we are. We are a faithful people. We're Eucharistic-based too. And we are a Trinitarian people. We have a lot of titles. We believe in the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, got a little fly here tonight who's attending here. You've been baptized? So, has anybody heard of John Deere? Not the owner of Deere Farm Machinery, but that's D-E-E-R-E. But this is John Deere, D-E-A-R, like Dear John. And this is the Gospel of Peace. I was telling Deacon Nick about this last night. And it's not a book you just sit down and read, but it's a commentary on the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So, for example, if you go to Mass every day, you could look up that reading and flip to where that's here, and you'll get a little commentary explaining it and breaking it open a little bit more so you understand it at a deeper level, or even just the Sunday readings if you do that. The forward is, you want to read about that. It talks about what nonviolence is, okay? But it's a perspective of nonviolence that we never really think about Jesus as being nonviolent. But he bases it on Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Both were people who nonviolence. Now, Gandhi read the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, every day for 40 years. He would, every Monday and every Friday, I think, he would take a day of fasting. But he would spend 2 hours in prayer just on the Beatitudes. He said, we are a Beatitude people. There's another title we have. We're Beatitude people, okay? And so this is extremely well done. It's actually $34, but if you could go to johndeere.org, his website, you can get it for $20. Makes a good doorstop too, but it's better than that. And just, I can promote another book. Are you familiar with Richard Rohr? Richard Rohr is great on masculine spirituality. And this is his latest book, was just published on Ash Wednesday. This is called The Tears of Things, Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage. Isn't that an interesting title? And it's based upon Jesus wept. Jesus went to Jerusalem where he was to be crucified. Has anybody been to the Holy Land, by the way? A couple of you have? Glad you went then, because you can't go now. Maybe someday. But Jesus was in, there's a church there, a chapel called Dominus Flavit, which is Latin for Jesus wept. He wept over Jerusalem and said, "Oh, Jerusalem, if you only knew the way to peace." He could say that all over the world today, couldn't he? If you only knew the ways of peace rather than violence. And so it was destroyed. As you know, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D., about 40 years after Jesus was crucified. So Jesus, in his crucifixion, that was a pretty violent act. That's kind of our modern day death penalty. That's what that was, capital punishment. He was executed by hanging it on a cross. But he didn't respond violently, did he? He didn't say, well, my father's going to get even with you. If you only knew who my dad was, you wouldn't have done that to me. So he didn't seek revenge, retribution, getting even, punishing, right? He stopped the violence by not responding, by acceptance, total surrender. That prayer we sang last night was written by St. Ignatius of Loyola, who surrendered completely to God and to God's way. So that's called sacrificial love. We all do that, don't we? Especially those of you who might be parents. You're always putting yourself on the back burner and your kids first. And many of you might be grandparents, which whenever I talk to grandparents, they love it because they can say, "Oh, hi, honey. Bye, honey." But spend a lot of quality time with them without having to be the authority figure. And those of us who are single have a special vocation too. We have a little bit more freedom, perhaps, than married people do, to involve ourselves in other kinds of activities that promote justice, that promote kindness, that promote peace. So we want to be people of justice and people of peace. And so we try to follow the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are on the back of that sheet. On the bottom, we all know them very well. This is what Gandhi prayed, and comes from chapter 5, how to be a disciple. If we're have the spirit of the poor. We try to live simply, just taking what we need. That comes from Native American spirituality. They always try to make decisions 7 generations out. So they're thinking of their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, their great-great-grandchildren, 7 generations out, not just focused on the here and now, the short-term benefits. That's a wonderful spirituality that is similar to the Beatitudes. And living simply so others can live. Like, how much do we need, right? You can always have more, but do we need it? And we all mourn in some way. We've all had losses of loved ones, ones we care for, or other kinds of losses of health or whatever. But we can be much more empathic and compassionate with others who experience loss because we've been through that ourselves. And so it gives us the gift of compassion. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And important to take care of the earth, our mother, our sister, to care for her in the best way we can. And we hunger and thirst for justice, to be merciful, to be pure of heart. You know, it says, blessed are those who are pure of heart, so they shall see God. You know, we see with the eyes of God when we are people of peace. The clean of heart. So we want to make our hearts soft, open, not closed, not hard-hearted, not cold-hearted, but to be people of empathy and makers of peace, not just peacekeepers, but intentionally try to make peace for our own relationships through forgiveness, through acceptance. Is forgiveness a sign of strength or a sign of weakness? Strength? Anybody can not forgive, right? And we can all hold grudges, or we can have bitterness or resentment. But it takes a person of integrity to forgive somebody who's hurt us. We've all been hurt. Life's hurts. So that calls forth something deeper from us. We might have to go to prayer about that. And it can't come immediately. Maybe it takes years, months or years. Especially we're having a healing service April 9th, I think it is, at Le Moyne College, for victims of any kind of abuse, but especially clergy sexual abuse. That can take years or decades for a person to forgive that tremendous wound, and not to forgive too early, too soon. Those of us who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, we all know stories. Those people here in the movies were persecuted to some extent. We're not going to make a lot of friends all the time for peacemakers, okay? And when they insult you and persecute you and all manner of evil, and rejoice because your reward in heaven will be great. Those are the Beatitudes that we try to live by. We're not perfect at it. But here's the anti-Beatitudes just above that. You can Google that, and it shows you there was some gentleman on a retreat who wrote these anti-Beatitudes. And you can see how anti-gospel, anti-beatitude. So blessed are the proud and the self-sufficient who believe that they're the center of the earth, for theirs are the kingdoms of the world. Blessed are the content and those who fail to see the suffering of others, for they shall know not of their ignorance. Blessed are the arrogant and the harsh in attitude, for they shall control the happiness of the less fortunate. Blessed are they who gather expensive things undeservedly and flaunt them in the face of others, for they should be filled with feelings of superiority. Blessed are the bullies, the unforgiving, and those who force grievance, for they shall cause destruction and keep score. Blessed are the perverted, the adulterers, the lustful, they shall all be esteemed by Satan for growing his kingdom. Blessed are the warmongers, the agitators, the vengeful, for they shall be called the children of Satan. That's pretty severe, isn't it? But it sounds true, doesn't it? Promoting the evil spirit. Blessed are they who do evil, but fail to get caught, for they shall be considered heroes. Blessed are the liars, the gossipers, those who make fun of others to cause them harm and embarrassment, for they shall have confidence and be placed ahead of others. So we're aware of that spirit in the world, aren't we? That negative spirit that creates negative energy, and negative energy can bring us down, can it? If you're around negative people, what happens? How do you feel? Huh? Down in the dumps. You want to avoid that person, don't you? If a person's too negative, it's like, uh-oh, going the other way. So we want to promote people feeling good about themselves, building up, encouraging, supporting. That's part of our call. We're all called by Jesus. Every single one of us has been called. That's pretty humbling, isn't it? If you looked at John 15, he says, it wasn't you who chose me, I chose you to go forth and to bear fruit. Okay? I remember one of my first retreats, I was going to go study spiritual direction, and I'd never made a directed retreat. This is way back in 1983. It's like an 8-day retreat where you spend the day in prayer, you meet with the director 1 hour per day. So I was out in Weston, Massachusetts, big old building there, former seminary owned by the Jesuits, and huge acres of land. So I was walking out, never been there before, and I turn around and I see this statue of Jesus. And there's a hand there like this, and it's kind of like it's not moving, but I had the sense that it was saying, John, come here. And the finger was like pointing at me. I'm like, gee, okay. So I went there, and as soon as I got there, the finger was like, go. Like, oh, wait, I just got here. But as I sat with that, I realized that Jesus was calling me into relationship with him to be sent to experience what I was called to be, what he saw in me. And we're all given that call. Jesus says, come here. And then he sends us. And where are you being sent? Sometimes we're sent where we might not want to go. Remember, Jesus said that to Peter? You know, when you were young, you went where you wanted, you did what you wanted to do. When you get older, you know, someone will dress you perhaps or whatever. So as we age, sometimes we can be more dependent on people. But it's not just about aging. Where are places we might not want to go? I don't think Jesus wanted to go to the cross, do you? But sometimes we're called to suffer in some kinds of ways. But where is God in the suffering? It's certainly not caused by God, but God will be with us in that. So we're called to be people, beatitude people, not anti-beatitude people. Because beatitude people produce great fruit, which lasts forever. So we're called to live this gospel of life, of peace and nonviolence. That's a power unto itself. It's not a dominant power. It's not a power over, but it empowers other people. So yesterday in the gospel of the Samaritan woman, he empowered her to go forth because he accepted her as a woman. He put her in touch with who she was as a woman, and he revealed himself to her as the Messiah. That happens if you look at all those scripture passages. Another thing that we continually need to do is read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke especially. John can be a little challenging, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke, especially Luke, a lot of healing in there. How does he empower people? Especially women, he always tries to empower them. Men, sometimes he puts us in touch with our powerlessness. It's interesting, someone pointed out to me in the 12-step program, the first thing, and it was founded by 2 men, the first step is to say, my name is John, and I am powerless. So for men to say we're powerless is challenging because men buy into the myth that we can fix everything. I remember one time when I was at St. Augustine's in Baldwinsville, there was a woman who made an appointment with me, and I don't know what it was for, but she came in and she said, well, here's the thing. And I tried to give her some suggestions. I said, how about this? No, that won't work. How about this? Oh, my husband asked me, no, that won't work either. How about this? No. Everything I suggested, she said no. So I left, and I felt very frustrated. I didn't really help her at all, because I wanted to fix it for her. And I went home, and I just happened to have that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. So I picked up this, I must have been in the first chapter. I was like, God was speaking to me. He said, women, especially, but everybody, really want to be listened to, because everybody has the answer inside. So a couple weeks later, another woman called and wanted to see me, and I sat down, and we spent about 50 minutes, and I said, yep, yeah, sure, yeah, oh, good idea, yep. I hardly said anything at all at the end. She said, Father, you've been so helpful to me. I know exactly what I need to do. So you men who are married know all about that, right? It's about listening and not suggesting or not trying to fix. So us clergy have a lot to learn. But it's, so the power, we might feel powerless, but there's a power in the powerlessness. Does that make sense to you? When we experience our vulnerability, I do spiritual direction. I sit with a number of people, just help them discern where God is in their life, what God might be inviting them to, and what they're being called to. And sometimes when they're talking, I feel very vulnerable, like, oh, gee, where's this going to go, And I always have to try to have a crucifix near me. I can look at it and say, help me, Jesus. And so I say that prayer, and I feel connected again. But it's journeying with Jesus. And he does a lot of listening. Pope Francis says, listening is a ministry. What's it like when you find someone who really listens to you? Isn't that uplifting? When you can tell your story, and when we do, we get the answer. As opposed to somebody who's, you want to talk about your back pain. Oh, you have back pain. You want to hear about my back pain. You know what happened to me? And I did this 40 years ago. No, that's not a good listener. I want to listen to you. So we are a culture addicted to violence. It's getting even. We have so many guns in our culture, don't we? I think it's, what did I read, 400 million? When I read that, I said, that can't be true, but that's what it is. More than one gun for every person living in the States. So, but we're against violence in all forms. So, here's what John Deere says about nonviolence. We want to be nonviolent to ourselves, first of all. Secondly, be nonviolent to anybody whom we know. And thirdly, be nonviolent to all creation and all creatures, because they're all made by God. So how can we be angry at ourselves sometimes? Sometimes we can overextend ourselves and not have enough time, and we get stressed out. That's certainly doing violence to ourselves. I do that myself. You start out with one thing, and then a funeral comes in, and then something else comes in, and something else comes in. You say yes, and before you know it, that Saturday comes and like, oh my goodness, I got 5 things going on. How am I going to do this? So that's doing violence to myself. But the good thing is if we can name it, and we have awareness, we have a choice. We can be nonviolent to others, perhaps by the silent treatment, or by not listening to them, or not paying enough attention. So it's really about relationships, huh? How do we develop our relationships? And we're not going to be perfect. None of us here are perfect. And then to creation too. How do we care for creation? We know we have a climate crisis that we have to pay attention to. So all the small things we can do are all helpful, even though it's just a little bit. But not to give up. So we have to remember who we are. Who are we? We're the beloved daughters and the beloved sons of God. But we can forget who we are, and then we can create experiences of war, or capital punishment, or killing, or lesser things. That we forget who we are. Capital punishment, as you know, Pope John Paul II condemned that. He said there's no reason to have capital punishment anymore. That we can keep people in prison, life imprisonment with no parole. So we don't have to kill. So we want to look at Mary, her whole journey to nonviolence. We're going to look at three things: her Annunciation, her Visitation, and her Magnificat. So the Annunciation, she was a woman of prayer, a contemplative woman of prayer, and that would be what we call contemplative nonviolence. Just like Jesus spent a lot of time in solitude, you know, they were always looking for him, and where did they find him? He was out in the field or in the mountain or by the water praying in solitude. He'd get up early. So he was, I wonder where he learned that, maybe from his mother, huh? Because she was always a woman of prayer. So that was her contemplation. And then, and she knew who she was, because, you know, she finally said, when the angel asked her, would you be the mother of God's son? She took a while, and then she said, yes, be it done unto me according to my word, according to your word. I am the maidservant of the Lord. So her identity was the maidservant of the Lord. Jesus' identity was the beloved Son of God. And who are we? We are also beloved daughters and beloved sons. And we are called to be servants of the God of peace, not defined by culture of war, but by being peacemakers. It's interesting that God doesn't appear to a big authority figure or the Roman Empire. He appears to this Palestinian poor woman from Nazareth, Mary of Nazareth, a poor peasant woman. And look what she did. Over in Belgium, I forget where it is, in Ghent or Brent, one of those cities, there's a lot of artwork in Europe, of course. And there's a triptych. Do you know what a triptych is? It's 3 different series of pictures. They're all connected by maybe hinges. And the first one has the angel appearing to Mary and asking her if she'll be the mother of Jesus. And in the middle is the big one, and Mary is contemplating that. And over here is all the animals of the kingdom in heaven looking over the railing, seeing to see if Mary's going to say hi. Going to say yes, not hi. Hi, yes. And so when she finally says yes to the angel, all the animals, you can imagine them, the elephants raising their trunks and the giraffes raising their heads and so on, just an excitement and joy there. So the first response she has, though, is the angel said, now don't be afraid. I think angels must be very foreboding, don't you? Don't be afraid. And it says that, Richard Rohr says, it says in Scripture 365 times, do not be afraid. What does that say? Each day, don't be afraid. It's normal to feel fearful, but don't be afraid because, why? I'm going to be with you. Now, you probably know the story of Martin Luther King Jr. when he was in Memphis, Tennessee, I think it was, working with the garbage men to, get higher wages. People were very angry with him wherever he went. That bus boycott that lasted a whole year, they wanted him out of town. So they kept calling, and of course this was before cell phones, calling his home. And one time he got a phone call at midnight with his wife and one of his children in bed. And it said, if you don't go back to wherever you're from, Atlanta, we're going to bomb your house with your wife and your daughter in it. And he was so frightened, he got up, made himself a cup of coffee at midnight at the kitchen table, laid his head down and said, God, if you want me to continue this work, you got to let me know that you are with me. And he said, he distinctly heard a voice that said, Martin, stand up for justice, stand up for peace, stand up for anti-racism. I will be with you. And so for the rest of his active life there, which was maybe 10 years, he said he never felt afraid again. because he knew God was with him. So we listen to those inner voices that maybe come to us in the night, or come to us in a dream, or come to us when we're driving the car, when we're thinking about something. It's like, oh yeah, it's like an awakening. Can that be the voice of God? I would say so. So God trying to overcome our fears. And so that first annunciation, she says yes, and immediately she gets up. We're told they use that word, Luke uses that word, immediately. She got up and ran to the hill country to meet her kinswoman, Elizabeth, who we know was pregnant with John the Baptist. And so they embraced, and Elizabeth said, the child in my womb just leapt for joy. Of course, John was 6 months in the womb at that time. And so she puts this act of nonviolence into play by experiencing this contemplative experience of God, then being moved to go out of herself to assist someone in need. Apparently Elizabeth was an older woman. And then, after her at the visitation, she proclaims the Magnificat. Remember the words of the Magnificat? Oops, hello. Words of the Magnificat. My soul proclaims the greatness of God. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. God has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to feed the hungry, to pull down the rich from their thrones and tables, and to free the oppressed. That was her prayer, a prophetic prayer. Now that prayer was forbidden to be prayed in the churches of Central America during the 70s. This was during the El Salvador War, because the government felt it was too revolutionary, that they were trying to uplift the poor and pull down the wealthy. So they forbade that church to be prayed, and because they were threatened by it, that the lowly poor people might stage an uprising or something. And the same thing when the mothers of the disappeared in Chile. Remember how all the men disappeared, the women's husbands or brothers or fathers. The women went out into the plaza with these big signs with all the words of the Magnificat on it. And the authorities came along and ripped all those signs up. You are not allowed to use that prayer here. Who knew? That would be such a threatening prayer, you know? But I guess when you have the power, the authority, you can be afraid too that you're going to lose it. So more power, clamp down more with more regulations. So that's the power of nonviolence. Again, we see that. So any questions about that? Isn't that interesting? That's from John Deere's book. It talks about these three movements of nonviolence. Contemplation, prayer, a movement into call to go into action, and then we take this prophetic stance. So we can see those in some of those movies that you'll see, how they're all prophets. We're called to be prophets today. Prophets of a God of love, prophets of a God of peace, in a culture of violence, a culture of war. To form a community. We can't do that by ourselves. We need a community of people. That's what our churches are for, to build community, to build relationships. You know, you probably do that in small communities, huh? Getting together for whatever you get together for. You get to know each other. You know, you come together and you see each other at Mass. You receive the Eucharist. You hear the Word of God. Reflect upon that and put that into action. Some kind of social action. I know you have a food pantry here, which is wonderful. That's a way of reaching out to those most in need. There was a wonderful article in yesterday's paper, Sunday morning paper, I don't know if you get that, on a young woman whose sister had died, and she used to be a very kind, generous young woman, and always giving stuff away to people. So when she died, she found $20 in her purse, and she had another $80, so she had $100. The sister contributed $400 more and gave $20 to each of her students. She was a teacher, and said, I want you to do something good with this $20, an act of kindness to somebody else, and come back and you'll tell the story, we'll take a video of it. So one girl high school girl went in and ordered a glass of water at a restaurant and left a $20 tip. Somebody else bought these little trinkets or something for children who were in kindergarten and gave each one of them a trinket. Others made a $20 donation to the food pantry or something like that. So acts of kindness. Dorothy Day, remember her? She's up for canonization too. So many good people. She did little things for people, just like Teresa of Lisieux. You know her story. St. Teresa said, do small things well. She was called the little flower of Jesus. And Dorothy Day, when she first heard that Teresa had said that, she kind of poo-pooed it. She said, no, we got to do big things. But she realized, because she opened these houses of hospitality for the poor, for the unhoused, and she did little things for them well. You know, gave them food, had food on plates rather than just on a paper plate, but real china or a glass instead of plastic. So little things, treating them with dignity so they felt respected and cared for. You know, I told you that last night I volunteered at Emmaus Ministry. And one time a guy came in and said to Sheila, he said, you know, if you stop handing out food here, we're still going to come because we experience such love and compassion here. So they have like a dual hunger, not only for food, but for dignity, because we treat them well. People say, Father, are you the pastor here? Or they go, is this your church? I go, yeah, it is. Well, we love coming here. So never underestimate that. Again, if you are parents, you've done a lot of little things for your kids, right? And we all do little things. But to do them well, and that's spreading good news. Just holding a door for somebody, making eye contact with a person, amazing how far that can go. And so to not underestimate that. But I just wanted to share, first of all, any questions or responses on that? Anything I've said so far? I just want to give you a couple of examples of witnesses of justice who are voices of hope, and what I would call it a biblical spirituality. How do we live a biblical spirituality? First of all, we look at the Gospels, and the more we know the Gospels, the more we know Jesus and what he was like and how he did what he did. So St. Oscar Romero, we talked about him earlier. There was also, remember the 6 Jesuits who were killed down in El Salvador. They were teaching at the Catholic University. And they were teaching about the social teaching of the church and upholding the poor. And so one night, the military came in while they were sleeping, dragged the 6 of them out of their bed. The housekeeper also had a room with her daughter, dragged those 2 out, laid the Jesuits down face down, and shot them in their brains to symbolically say, you are not to teach this terrible nonviolence about Jesus. And so when they went back and explored this whole thing, in one of the rooms there was a book knocked to the floor, and the title of the book was The Crucified Jesus Knows, no, the Crucified Jesus is No Stranger. So the crucified Jesus still lives among us, don't they? Those who are hungry, those who are looked down upon, those who are in countries where war takes place, where the civilians are no longer, they're not collateral danger, collateral damage. They are people. Remember when the wars used to take place on a battlefield? Now, you know, we bomb hospitals, we bomb electrical plants. So people can't get food, perhaps. They don't have any roads. They can't get even food in. So those are the people that we try to do small things well. Mother Teresa, she heard this voice on a train going to Calcutta, and the voice she heard said, be poor with the poor. And we know the rest of her life. She was always out on the streets, taking care of the poorest of the poor, you know. And she used to say to the sisters who came in, I want you to spend an hour a day in prayer. And if you don't have an hour a day to do it in prayer, you're too busy. And you might want to think about not becoming a sister of, what kind of sisters were they called? Missionaries of charity, right? Yeah, yeah. You can't give an hour a day to prayer, you're too busy. Let's see. Certainly Pope Francis, movement to the margins. He's taught us that well, hasn't he? Always goes out to the peripheries. He visits these countries, small population of Catholics, but he still visits them. He considers them important. Most of the cardinals around the world that he's appointed are from marginalized countries. A lot of them used to be from Italy. There's very few Italian cardinals anymore. So he's giving us an example. Because the majority of people in the world are poor. We're all wealthy, even though we might have a lot of money, but compared to the rest of the world, the new definition of poor is if you eat once a day. Isn't that staggering? If you eat once a day, you are rich. I remember going to Mexico to work with the Benedictine sisters. It was for North Americans to expose us to poverty, and it was all based on the Beatitudes. And the sisters would always give us these baskets of animal crackers to pass out, or candy bars. And I remember there was maybe a 7-year-old boy and his maybe 4 or 5-year-old sister, and I gave him a candy bar, and he immediately gave it to his sister. And I said, oh, don't you like chocolate? He goes, today's not my day to eat. What? Today's not my day to eat. Give me a break. So that's the kind of poverty that people live in. And we always went to visit I forget what you call it, but all these shacks where people lived, they were shacks, but the whole family lived there, one room. And they said, if they offer you anything, make sure you take it, because that's a sign of their hospitality. They want to give you something. So we spent about an hour with this woman and her 3 or 4 children, and she had a garden out front. She said, oh, I want to give you some of my lettuce and my beans to take home with you. And we knew she needed that for her kids, but we couldn't say no, because it would be rude to do that. But she was delighted that we would take that. And we couldn't eat it because the bacteria is so different. But I think the sisters took care of it for us. They washed it and everything. But anyhow, just such witnesses to, that's why it's always good. The poor teach us what it's like to be Christians. Josephine Bakhita, yeah, familiar with Josephine Bakhita? You go to St. Augustine to do, because she's the patroness of South Sudan. South Sudan is our newest country to gain independence in the world. They gained independence in 2011. And so that's a movie too. It's called Bakhita, Bakhita. That's wonderful, showing her transformation, because she was enslaved part of her life. Certainly St. Francis, St. Clare lived lives of simplicity, showed us lives of peace. St. Ignatius, finding God in all things. St. Maximilian Kolbe, you're familiar with him? There's a wonderful statue of him in the front yard of Transfiguration Church over on Teal Ave. He was imprisoned during the Holocaust, and a couple people had escaped apparently. And so if anybody escaped, they would kill 10 Jewish people in place of the ones who escaped, just to show them who's in charge. And so one man, he said, I'm a father of 5, can you spare my life? And Maximilian Kolbe, who was a priest, said, I'll take his place. You let him go free. And so he was executed on the spot. So now we don't all have to be killed, okay? Some of those are extreme examples, but it shows us just the numbers of people who are people of the gospel, who try to live nonviolently. And there are consequences, but we do what we can do. Now, so where do we find hope? Where do you find hope to live the gospel? Think about that. Well, do you think Jesus ever got discouraged? Because they just weren't getting it. The disciples just didn't get it. So he had just told people, I'm going to go to Jerusalem where I'm going to have to suffer and be killed there, because that's where all the prophets are killed. And remember, they said, oh, no, that can't happen to you. Peter said, no, Lord, not you. And the other said, no. And what did Jesus say to Peter? Get behind me, Satan. This is what I have to do. So the disciples weren't getting it. His family wasn't getting it. Remember when he went home one time after he'd been doing healing, and they said, he's crazy. He's out of his mind. They went to throw him over the precipice. So his family didn't understand him. The disciples didn't understand him. You ever know people, sometimes you make a decision, they go, you're really going to do that? I don't get it. You got to be crazy. You're out of your mind, So it can be a little discouraging. So he was discouraged, perhaps. So he went up the mountain for the Mount Tabor. We call it the Feast of the Transfiguration. And there, on this high point, a voice from the clouds that covered him said, this is my beloved Son. He appeared with Moses and Elijah, and they supported him, and they gave him support. And then when he went down, remember the first thing he did? He ran into a woman who was, her son had died. He was on this bier. They were carrying him. And he touched the young man and said, arise. And the man woke up. So he had gotten strength from his prayer life up there on Transfiguration, new energy, new support, and came down the mountain and was able to transfigure others. So we get support from the community, from the Eucharist, from gathering together. Some of these movies, if you can't get them, maybe the parish here could rent a copy or whatever and show them on an afternoon or an evening, 2 hours, have a little discussion, or get them and invite 6 or 8 other people over, have a conversation, or read a book together, some spiritual book. I'm sure Father Hyde or Deacon Nick could recommend some good books to you. So that's a glimpse of the resurrection, okay? Even raising Lazarus from the dead is a glimpse of the resurrection. They had put death behind a stone, and they wanted to keep it there. That's where it belonged. And so when Jesus said, take away the stone, they resisted. They said, no, it's going to smell. There'll be a stench. He said, didn't I tell you, if you believed, you will see the glory of God? And do you believe I'm the resurrection and the life? Yes, Lord, we believe. So they opened it up, and Lazarus came forth all bound up, said, let him go free. Untie him and let him go free. So we have been called not to be bound up with violence, but to trust that nonviolence will always, always overcome the violent. Good will always overcome the evil. It takes a long time. How long did women's suffrage take? 100 years. How long did the abolitionists work? Frederick Douglass, I don't know how many years, but Martin Luther King, 100 years for civil rights. But it happened. So we have to trust. It's like a 12-step program. If a person becomes addicted, there's that addictive period in their lives, and then something happens, they hit bottom, and there's an awakening, and then they go for the 12-step program, and that would be kind of and then they recover. So there's the order, then the disorder, and then the reorder. So you might say, what's another way of saying it? Something's born, and then it dies, but then it's reborn. So I'm thinking, with all the violence in our world, all the suffering in our world, how much longer can it go on before people say, okay, that's enough? Obviously, violence is not working. We need to find another way. And so our voice, the voice of the church, you are the church, our voices, whether it's your workplace and your family, opportunities to be kind, to be loving, to forgive, not to react with violence, And that's difficult to do. If you find somebody from the other party, they, oh no, you're one of those, you're one of those. Can we just listen, perhaps, rather than reacting? So respond rather than react. That takes a lot of courage. But I'm thinking that that's got to happen eventually, like a 12-step program. We have to, I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say. Construction, destruction, and restructuring. So we have, what did I say first of all? Construction, sure. Construction, destruction, and then reconstruction. That's it. Remember that and tell me, okay? So, so that's the process. Doesn't that happen all the time? So there's a breakdown so that something else can be born. Isn't that what death is? We die to this life to be reborn to something new. We put seeds in the ground, they die to themselves to become a wonderful plant. So I think in such an extreme, violent world that we live in, so much suffering, we have to say, we can't go on like this. How do we feed the poor? There's enough for everybody in the world, we're told. If we didn't hoard, if there's no hoarding and share it, there wouldn't be any hungry people. There wouldn't be the suffering if we got rid of our armaments. We all said, okay, enough is enough. How many nuclear warheads do we have? 3,700. 3,700. How many worlds can that blow up? Do we really need all those? Again, we have to create the new world. Jesus came to bring a new world, a new kingdom, not based on the Beatitudes here, not the anti-Beatitudes. So we have to get rid of the old world order, it's not working, and say, here's a new world order, and we are followers of Jesus and the gospel, and we are promoters of the gospel of peace. That's who we are. So that's hopeful, because Jesus got a lot of pushback, but he knew who he was, the beloved Son of God. Mary knew she was the maidservant. We know who we are. And so God will always be with us, just with Martin Luther King. Don't be afraid. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth. Stand up for peace. I will be with you. Amen. All right. Thank you so much for your attendance tonight. And Josh, you're going to lead us in some song and prayer.
We'll conclude our evening with number 824 in Gather. Put peace into each other's hands. 824.
Put peace into each other's hands, and like a treasure hold it, protect it like a candle flame, with tenderness enfold it. Put peace into each other's hands, with loving expectation, each gentle in your words and ways, in touch with God's creation. Put peace into each other's hands, like bread we break for sharing. Look people warmly in the tender hands, like out in trust and blessing. Where words fall short, let hands speak out the heights of love expressing. Reach out in friendship, stay in faith, in touch with those around you. Put peace into each other's hands, the peace that sought and found you.
Again, I'd like to thank Father Hyde and Deacon Nick and your staff for the invitation to be here, and especially for you for being here yourselves. So I hope you have a rest of a good Lent and a happy Easter.
Thank you. And Father Don, I just want to thank you, and you've given me plenty of homily material. I'm going to imitate Father Joseph Champlin, who always said that if you stole other people's good ideas to make a good homily, it was pious theft. So thank you once again, and we're glad to have you. Thank you.
Thanks.